All right, guy. Hey, by the way, Dean, have you ever heard of rodeo cold beer? Do you know what rodeo cold beer is?
Rodeo cold?
Yeah.
Is that where it's been in the back seat of your truck?
Yeah.
For
Until you go do your rodeo. So you go ride a bronc or a bull or something, and afterward you come out and
yes, and that's like
you open one of these.
That's like dashboard burritos.
Yeah, dashboard. I had a dashboard burrito. How about that right there from John Parkoff? I'm gonna drink a rodeo cold beer here. Listen, you can't get a more up to the minute what would Dean do than this. We are literally right off the water, still on my boat here. Dean was on his boat with some clients. I went out. So since we did the live show, I want to go ahead and do what would Dean do, and I'll start it off with kind of what I did for what it's worth, because I did end up with about 8 or 10 trout, a few nice ones, probably 19, 20 inches, about 3 or 4 of those. So Dean, I'm going to get to you in a second, but right now, everything that we talked about in the seminar and the Q&A over at the fishing show, I did today, and it ultimately paid off. It was a struggle. It was a slow bite, but I found that deep drop off that you always talk about, and then I kind of did the hopscotch thing for a little bit to see if I could really work an area, work the whole front of the boat, use the trolling motor a little bit. But it wasn't epic, but there were some really, really nice fish there. So everything we talked about, find the drop off, the water was really, really low, and I know you're going to cover some of that, but what would you do this weekend? And you are just off the water.
Well, I mean, February has been a typical February. There's been some really cold weather, and there's been some beautiful weather. Today is amazing. Actually, I've had water temperature this month that ranged from 54 degrees to 72 degrees today. So if you like dealing with a lot of changes, you'll love February. Super low tide, ultra low tide. Can't tell you guys how low the tide has been. So I've been sticking to the flats. I've hit the drop-offs. I've fished around the edges. They just haven't been really fast and furious for me. Some speckled trout, but small schoolies that just didn't keep my attention very long. So I've been fishing the deeper holes on the flats. And it's, when I say holes, it's not like a real defined hole. It's more like an indention in the flat. It's just deeper flats. And here in Redfish Bay, those deeper flats are on the west side of the bay, along the intercoastal and just along the spoil islands and such. So in the next couple days, the next week, we have some beautiful weather. I mean, 86, 88 degrees in the afternoon. So every day behind, we got the full moon coming up too in a couple days, which we're looking at the week after the full moon, which can be somewhat challenging. But when it comes to February, the water temperature and the conditions tend to override the moon. So, I mean, you consider the whole equation, but what we have is some great conditions. So beautiful weather for drifting, but it's still going to be subsurface. These fish are not coming and attacking topwaters. They're hitting slow and low on the bottom and putting a little soft plastic in that sand hole, just tinking it across the bottom, letting it sit still. I mean, we've had a lot of fish pick it up actually sitting still.
I'm glad you said that, because you guys know, and Dean knows, I'm always a catch and release guy. But I actually ended up keeping one fish today because it did exactly that. I was going so slow in those potholes. It was like 2.5 feet, 3. That was deep. That was deep where I was. In fact, there's that little fish right there. Poor guy. He swallowed that knock and tail hole, man. And so there was no getting it out without him surviving. So I guess I'm going to have a fish fry today. But what would you recommend? Because the low tides are up and down the coast, and the conditions are up and down the coast.
Yeah, but I mean, it's exceptionally warm, so it's going to be very much more like March and early April opposed to what you expect to see in February. And there's no change in the forecast coming. I mean, we're looking at 5 days of 80-degree temperature. Yeah. So, I mean, I may try some top waters in the next couple days and start to mix that in a little bit. But, you know, I would like to see the tide come back up, and it would let me broaden my horizons. Yeah. With the low tide, I mean, you're confined to the areas where you can fish. There's not a lot of creativity when it's this low. You work with what you got.
I tried. Yeah. When I was struggling, I was bouncing around.
And the edges of those flats may be time for those to take off. I mean, so early spring is when the trout move to those drop-offs. And I mean, you find a nice little pocket where they're streaming up and down those shorelines, and you can have some nonstop action on speckled trout coming up in the next couple of weeks.
I did try a couple of, I tried topwater a few times, didn't have any luck. It was all on the low and slow on the bottom, like you talked about. Now, last thing, and we're gonna let you go here. When you're fishing this weekend, and that's why we're trying to do this, whether if you have these conditions and you listen to this video in 6 months and you have these types of conditions, or 8 months, whatever it may be, you can maybe translate this. But this weekend in particular, you had to work. You had to work for it.
Yeah, we had a few brief moments where we had one after another, and I thought the action was fixing to get crazy. And then we would go an hour or two without another bite.
Yeah.
And then we'd hit another little pocket with a congregation of mullet, and we would pull a couple of nice fish out of that.
Yeah.
So the best advice I can give is, keep working at it. Be patient. I mean, we've said that for the last couple of weeks about being patient. Pick an area and be very thorough. Look for the mud stirs. Look for mullet. If you go through an area and you've cast it into a sand hole 10 times, you covered it up, and the boat drifts to it. Boom, big mud stir. 2 or 3 reds come out of that hole. Just circle around, fish that area again. And another thing, they're not running. When you spook them, they're not vacating the scene. They might run 50 or 100 feet, and they're going to set back down.
Yeah.
But, we'll see how long that activity keeps up. If the water stays in the 70 degrees, you're going to start seeing an explosion of bait fish, an explosion of life, and just like the leaves on the trees that are starting to grow, it feels like spring here. And that activity is going to shift gears from winter-style fishing to spring-style fishing.
I know I said last thing, but you just reminded me of something else. Afternoon bite.
We never have one last thing.
I know.
We never.
It was an afternoon bite. I was going to come in earlier, and then I got into a few and just stayed out there.
And the mornings have been very tough for me. That's why I postponed my trip today.
Yeah.
We launched at 10 o'clock, fished until 4, and from noon on, it was much more likely, a little bit better action. And then at the very end, from 3 to 4, we did our best.
Yeah, me too. All right, guys, that's an up to the minute What Would Dean Do? Hope you guys catch him up. And don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast.